The radio crackled with static and terror. 280 Marines, cut off in the Helmand Valley, ammunition running low, enemy closing in from 3 sides. In the command tent at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, officers stared at red blinking dots on tactical screens, each one a heartbeat that might stop before dawn. But in the corner, a figure in intelligence uniform stood silent, hands steady, eyes calculating every grid coordinate. They had no idea who she really was. They had no idea what rules she was about to break. The wind howled across the Afghan mountains, carrying dust and the distant echo of gunfire from the valley below. FOB Sentinel sat perched on a ridge like a fortress of sandbags and determination, its perimeter lights cutting harsh lines through the pre-dawn darkness. Inside the main operations center, the air was thick with tension and the smell of burnt coffee. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Ghost Mitchell stood near the back wall, clipboard in hand, watching the chaos unfold on the digital displays. To everyone else, she was just another intelligence analyst, quiet, efficient, unremarkable. She'd been assigned to Sentinel for 3 weeks, processing satellite feeds and writing reports that gathered dust on desks back at headquarters. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The morning briefing had been routine until the call came in. Bravo Company. 280 Marines conducting a sweep operation in Helmand Province had walked into a carefully planned ambush. What was supposed to be a quick reconnaissance had turned into a nightmare of crossfire and casualties. Sarah watched the tactical display with the practiced eye of someone who'd read terrain like others read newspapers. The Marines were pinned in a valley with steep walls on both sides, enemy positions dug into the high ground, classic kill box, textbook encirclement, and according to the weather reports, 0 chance of air support until the sandstorm passed. Colonel James Crawford stood at the head of the briefing table, his weathered face grim under the fluorescent lights. He was career Army, the kind of officer who'd risen through the ranks by making careful decisions and avoiding unnecessary risks. His voice carried the weight of command and the burden of impossible choices. "Gentlemen," he said, voice steady but strained, "Bravo Company is surrounded. Weather's got us grounded until at least 0800 hours. No rotary wing, no fixed wing, no close air support." The room fell silent except for the hum of equipment and the distant generator. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but her face remained impassive. She'd seen this before, in a different desert, under different circumstances. The same look of helpless calculation in officers' eyes when mathematics collided with morality. Major Kevin Reyes, the operations officer, leaned forward. "Sir, what about ground convoy? We could push through with armor support." Crawford shook his head. "Negative. Intelligence indicates IEDs planted along all primary routes. We'd be sending good men into the same trap." His eyes swept the room. "We wait for weather clearance." A communications specialist looked up from his console. "Sir, Bravo 6 is requesting immediate extraction. They're reporting multiple casualties and running low on ammunition. Tell them to hold their position." Crawford replied, the words coming out harder than intended. "That's all we can do right now." Sarah's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around her clipboard. Under her sleeve, hidden from view, was a tattoo most people in this room would never recognize, a gold trident crossed with an anchor, surrounded by wings. The SEAL warfare pin, earned through months of hell that few could survive, and fewer still could understand. She'd requested the assignment to FOB Sentinel specifically, though no one knew why. 3 years ago, her SEAL team had been extracted from this same valley after a mission that still carried the highest classification. She knew every ridge, every cave, every hidden trail that the satellite feeds couldn't show. She knew the terrain better than anyone in this room, but her personnel file listed her as intelligence analyst, desk assignment due to administrative reassignment. What they didn't know was that the administrative reassignment had been her choice. After losing half her team in Syria, she'd requested a transfer away from active operations. The nightmares still came, and command had been happy to let their first female SEAL team leader fade into the background of analysis and reports. But watching those red dots blink on the screen, listening to the increasingly desperate radio calls from Bravo Company, Sarah felt something stirring that she'd tried to bury for 3 years. The same instinct that had driven her through SEAL training, through the missions that earned her the Navy Cross, through the nights when she was the only thing standing between her team and certain death. A young radio operator's voice broke through her thoughts. "Sir, Bravo 6 reports enemy movement on all flanks. They estimate 2 hours before position is overrun." Colonel Crawford closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with the look of a man making peace with the impossible. "Copy that. Tell them to hold fast. Help is coming." But Sarah could see in his face what everyone else was thinking. Help wasn't coming. Not in time. The weather would clear eventually, but eventually was a luxury that 280 trapped Marines didn't have. She glanced around the room at the other officers. Good men, competent soldiers, bound by regulations and chain of command. They would follow orders, file reports, and live with the consequences of decisions made by weather patterns and risk assessments. But Sarah Mitchell hadn't survived 3 combat deployments and earned a call sign like Ghost by accepting the impossible. She'd earned it by making the impossible irrelevant. Her hand moved to the small tactical radio clipped to her belt. It was tuned to a frequency that officially didn't exist, one used by special operations teams for communications that needed to stay off the official record. She'd kept it out of habit, a reminder of who she used to be. The thought formed slowly, like ice crystallizing in her mind. There was another way. It would require breaking a dozen regulations, violating direct orders, and risking court-martial. It would mean revealing an identity she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. But 280 Marines were counting down the minutes until they ran out of options. Sarah quietly stepped back from the group, moving toward the exit with the practiced invisibility that had made her one of the most effective operators in SEAL Team 6. No one noticed her leave. They were too busy staring at the screens, watching red dots that represented real people, real heartbeats, real families who might never see their sons and daughters come home. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving sand against the prefab walls of the command center. The mountain air was thin and cold, cutting through her uniform like a blade. She walked toward a cluster of equipment containers where the noise of the generators would mask any conversation. She pulled out her tactical radio and switched to the special operations frequency. For a moment, she hesitated. Using that radio would be like lighting a flare that could be seen from Washington to Kandahar. There would be questions she couldn't answer, investigations she couldn't avoid, but through the static of the wind, she could still hear the faint echo of gunfire from the valley below. Somewhere in that darkness, 280 Marines were waiting for a miracle that standard operating procedure said wasn't coming. Sarah keyed the microphone and spoke quietly into the night. "Ghost Rider Base, this is Spectre 6. I need a bird and I need it now." The response came back almost immediately, a voice she recognized from operations that officially never happened. "Spectre 6. This is Ghost Rider. Confirm your status and location. FOB Sentinel. I'm requesting immediate air support for surrounded friendly unit. Weather's got everyone grounded." A pause. "Spectre 6. You're listed as non-operational status. What's your situation?" Sarah looked back toward the command center, where officers were still staring at screens and waiting for weather reports. Then she looked toward the valley where gunfire flickered like distant lightning. "Ghost Rider, I've got 280 Marines who are going to die if someone doesn't bend the rules. I'm requesting authorization to break some things." Another pause, longer this time. When the voice came back, it carried the tone of someone making a decision that would ripple through the chain of command like a small earthquake. "Spectre 6. You are cleared for independent operation. Ghost Rider assets are at your disposal. What do you need?" For the first time in 3 years, Sarah smiled the way she used to smile, before missions that everyone said were impossible. I need a ride into hell, Ghost Rider. And I need it to look like nothing ever happened. The morning briefing resumed with the mechanical precision of military routine, but the tension in the room had crystallized into something harder, more brittle. Colonel Crawford stood before the tactical display, his pointer tracing the red zone where Bravo Company remained pinned down. The numbers hadn't changed: 280 Marines, enemy on 3 sides, ammunition dwindling with each passing hour. Sarah had slipped back into the room unnoticed, taking her position against the back wall. Her face showed nothing of the conversation she'd just had. Nothing of the wheels already turning in motion beyond these walls. To everyone else, she was still just the quiet intelligence analyst with the unremarkable assignment and the boring reports. "Weather update," Crawford announced, consulting a tablet. "Storm system is intensifying. No air support until at least 1200 hours, possibly longer." A ripple of frustrated murmurs passed through the assembled officers. Major Reyes shook his head. "Sir, that's 6 hours. Bravo Company can't hold that long." Captain Marcus Webb, the battalion's air liaison officer, spoke up from his seat near the front. Webb was career Air Force, the kind of pilot who'd transitioned from cockpit to desk when his reflexes started slowing down. He had 20 years of experience and an ego to match. "Sir, I've been coordinating with air assets at Bagram," Webb said, standing to address the room. "Even if weather clears, we're looking at complex terrain, limited visibility, and unknown SAM threats. Any rescue operation would be high risk with low probability of success." Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but kept her expression neutral. She'd flown through that same terrain in conditions that would ground most pilots. The valley had challenges, but nothing that couldn't be overcome by someone who knew the patterns, who understood how the wind moved between the peaks, who had memorized every landing zone and extraction point from previous operations. Colonel Crawford nodded grimly. "Captain Webb raises valid concerns. We can't risk additional aircraft and crew on what might be a suicide mission." "Sir," interrupted Lieutenant Johnson, one of the younger officers, "we can't just leave them out there." Webb turned toward him with the patient condescension of a man explaining obvious facts to children. "Lieutenant, military operations require risk assessment. Emotional decisions get more people killed." The room fell silent. Sarah watched the exchange with the detached interest of someone observing a play she'd seen performed many times. The careful bureaucracy of modern warfare, where decisions were filtered through layers of procedure and protocol, until action became impossible. She thought about the radio call she'd just made. Somewhere, assets were already moving. Aircraft were being prepped, crews briefed, equipment loaded. People who understood that sometimes the impossible was just another way of saying unauthorized. Major Reyes consulted his notes. "Sir, Bravo 6's last report indicated they're down to 40% ammunition. Multiple wounded, including their corpsman." Crawford's face was stone. "Copy that. Continue monitoring the situation." "And do what, sir?" The question came from Captain Lisa Torres, the base intelligence officer. She was Sarah's immediate supervisor, a sharp woman who'd earned her position through competence rather than politics. "Monitor them until the radios go quiet?" "ADO's one of them until the radios go quiet." An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Everyone knew what she was really asking. "How long do we listen to them die?" Webb cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we have to be realistic about our capabilities. The enemy chose their ground well. High elevation, prepared positions, multiple escape routes. Even with air support, extraction would be extremely difficult." Sarah found herself speaking before she'd consciously decided to. "What if we went in low, under the weather?" Every head in the room turned toward her. She'd been so quiet during previous briefings that some of them had probably forgotten she was there. Webb looked particularly surprised, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly offered tactical advice. "Excuse me?" Webb said, his tone carrying just enough condescension to be professionally polite. Sarah kept her voice level. Analytical. The storm system is creating a temperature inversion. Cloud ceiling is low, but there's clear space underneath if you know where to look. Webb's expression shifted to the kind of patience reserved for explaining why the sky is blue. Miss. He paused, consulting his roster. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. Weather flying requires specialized training and equipment. This isn't a computer simulation. The dismissal was clear, professional, and complete. Sarah felt the familiar weight of assumptions, another desk jockey with theories, but no real experience. Another intelligence analyst who thought warfare was about moving dots on screens. Of course, sir, she said quietly. I was just reviewing meteorological data. Major Reyes looked at her with mild interest. What kind of data? Satellite imagery, wind patterns, historical weather models for this region. Sarah kept her tone academic, unremarkable. The storm appears more intense on radar than actual ground conditions suggest. Webb leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the opportunity to educate. Lieutenant Commander, radar interpretation requires understanding atmospheric physics. What you're seeing on satellite feeds doesn't translate to flyable conditions. Crawford raised a hand. Gentlemen, we're not here to debate meteorology. The fact remains that no aircraft are authorized to fly until weather conditions improve. Sarah nodded respectfully, but her mind was working through calculations Webb couldn't see. She'd flown through worse conditions in Syria, had navigated valleys in Afghanistan where satellites showed clear skies, but reality was 50 feet of visibility and winds that could flip an aircraft upside down. The difference was that she'd been flying with pilots who understood that regulations were guidelines, not absolutes. People who knew that sometimes saving lives required accepting risks that looked insane on paper. Her tactical radio buzzed once against her hip, a message received. Somewhere, preparations were being made, assets moving into position. The kind of coordination that happened when people decided rules were less important than results. Captain Torres spoke up again. Sir, what do we tell Bravo 6? They're expecting some kind of timeline. Crawford's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. Tell them we're working on it. Webb nodded approvingly. That's the right call, sir. Better to underpromise than give them false hope. Sarah watched Webb's face, cataloging the satisfaction there. The comfort of a man who'd made peace with limitation, who found safety in procedure and protocol. She'd met officers like him before, competent within their boundaries, but unable to see beyond the edges of what regulation allowed. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, Torres said, prepare an updated weather assessment for 1,400 hours. Include all available satellite data and predictive models. Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied. It would give her perfect cover to monitor conditions, to track the window of opportunity that was opening while everyone else waited for perfect conditions that might never come. As the briefing concluded and officers filed out, Sarah remained at her position against the wall. Through the radio static, she could hear the faint voices of Marines in the valley, their reports growing shorter, more clipped. The sound of people conserving ammunition and hope in equal measure. Webb paused near the door, turning back toward her with the expression of someone offering helpful advice. Mitchell, he said, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but weather flying isn't about reading reports, it's about understanding limitations. The best thing you can do for those Marines is provide accurate intelligence, not tactical suggestions. Sarah met his eyes and nodded. Understood. Sir, I'll stick to what I know. Webb smiled, satisfied. Good, that's how we keep everyone safe. He left, and Sarah was alone with the glowing screens and the distant sound of gunfire. She looked at the tactical display, at the red dots that represented 280 lives hanging in the balance. Then she looked at her watch. In 2 hours, assets would be in position. Weather conditions would be marginal but flyable for someone with the right training. The kind of training that didn't show up in her official personnel file, but existed in classified records that Webb would never see. She thought about limitations, about the safety Webb had mentioned, There was safety in following rules, in waiting for perfect conditions, in making decisions that could be defended in after-action reports. But there was no safety for 280 Marines who would be dead before the weather cleared. Sarah pulled out her tablet and began typing an updated weather assessment. It would be thorough, professional, and completely accurate about conditions as they existed on satellite feeds and meteorological models. What it wouldn't mention was that she'd already made her decision to ignore every limitation they thought applied to her. The intelligence center hummed with the quiet efficiency of war reduced to data points. Banks of monitors displayed satellite feeds, communication intercepts, and weather patterns that painted the battle space in cool digital precision. Sarah sat at her assigned workstation, officially analyzing meteorological data while actually monitoring the special operations frequency through her earpiece. Spectre 6. Ghost Rider assets are 15 minutes out from your location, came the barely audible voice. Package includes Little Bird with full stealth configuration and 2 operators. How copy? Sarah typed a weather report while responding in a whisper. Copy all, Ghost Rider. I'll be ready for pickup at grid 47 Tango. Around her, other analysts worked at their stations, processing intelligence from across the Afghanistan theater. None of them noticed her dual conversation, or if they did, they assumed she was clarifying some mundane data point with another department. Captain Torres approached her workstation carrying a coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Mitchell, how's that weather assessment coming? Almost complete, ma'am, Sarah replied, minimizing a screen that showed helicopter flight paths and maximizing one displaying atmospheric pressure readings. The storm system is definitely intensifying, but there are some interesting anomalies in the lower altitudes. Torres leaned over her shoulder to examine the data. She was one of the few officers at FOB Sentinel who'd actually spent time in the field before transitioning to intelligence work, and she had the kind of analytical mind that caught details others missed. What kind of anomalies? She asked. Sarah highlighted a section of the meteorological display. Temperature inversions, creating pockets of clear air below the main storm layer. Theoretically, aircraft could operate under the weather if they stayed within specific altitude windows. Theoretically, Torres repeated, her tone carrying just enough emphasis to make it clear she understood the distinction between theory and practice. Of course, ma'am. The risks would be substantial. Rapid weather changes, limited visibility, challenging terrain. Sarah kept her voice academically neutral while thinking about the dozens of similar conditions she'd flown through during her operational career. Torres studied the data for another moment. Include this analysis in your report, but flag it as theoretical only. I don't want anyone getting ideas about unauthorized flights. Yes, ma'am. As Torres moved away, Sarah's earpiece crackled again. Spectre 6, we have eyes on your location. Baseball cap, dark hair, intel uniform, correct? Sarah touched her cap briefly, a gesture that looked like she was adjusting it but actually confirmed her identity. Affirmative. Roger. We'll be standing by at Extract Point Tango. You have a 20-minute window. 20 minutes to get from the intelligence center to grid 47 Tango without drawing attention. It was doable, but it would require timing and a reason to leave the compound that wouldn't trigger questions. She pulled up the latest communication intercepts from Bravo Company. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Their last transmission reported enemy forces massing for what appeared to be a final assault. Ammunition was down to 30%, and they had multiple casualties who needed immediate medical evacuation. Mitchell, Major Ray's voice cut across the intelligence center. He was standing near the main tactical display, studying the same red dots that had been blinking there for hours. I need updated enemy strength estimates for Helmand Province. Yes, sir. Sarah minimized her weather data and pulled up enemy force assessments. It would give her a perfect excuse to cross-reference data from multiple sources, requiring her to move around the facility. She gathered her tablet and some paper files, standard procedure for an analyst checking information against hard copy intelligence reports. The files would also provide cover for the tactical gear she'd need to retrieve from her quarters before heading to the extraction point. "Sir," she said, approaching Reyes with the professional demeanor of someone delivering routine analysis. "The enemy strength estimates will require cross-referencing with human reports from Brigade. Permission to access the secure files?" Reyes nodded absently, his attention focused on the tactical situation. "Make it quick. I need numbers in 15 minutes. "Perfect." The secure files were stored in a separate facility across the compound, giving her reason to leave the intelligence center. More importantly, it would take her past the equipment storage area, where she'd cached gear from her previous assignment. Sarah walked through the compound with the measured pace of someone on a routine errand. The wind was picking up, driving dust between the prefab buildings and concrete barriers. Most personnel were either inside or moving quickly between cover points, giving her the anonymity of just another figure in desert camouflage. She reached the storage facility and used her access card to enter. Inside, rows of metal shelving held equipment for various operations, everything from communication gear to specialized survival equipment. She moved to a section marked Personal Effects, Incoming Personnel, and located a duffel bag with her name on it. Inside the bag was gear she hadn't touched in 3 years. A custom flight suit with armor panels sewn into critical areas. Night vision goggles rated for special operations. A tactical vest configured for her specific equipment preferences. And most importantly, a ceramic plate carrier with SEAL Team 6 unit patches that she'd kept despite officially transferring out of operations. She changed quickly, her movements automatic despite the years away from this routine. The gear fit perfectly, muscle memory guiding her hands through equipment checks she could perform in total darkness. When she was finished, she looked like what she actually was, a special operations veteran prepared for high-risk insertion. The transformation was complete when she pulled on her tactical gloves. Underneath the left one, barely visible, was the edge of a scar that ran from her wrist to her elbow. She'd earned it during the Syria operation, when shrapnel from an IED had nearly severed her radial artery. The medics had said she was lucky to keep the arm. Her team leader had said she was lucky to keep her life. Sarah checked her watch. 12 minutes to reach the extraction point. She sealed her intelligence analyst uniform in the duffel bag and prepared to become someone FOB Sentinel had never seen before. Her earpiece buzzed. "Spectre 6. Little Bird is inbound to Tango. Weather's getting nasty, so we'll need to move fast." "Copy, Ghost Rider. I'm en route." She stepped out of the storage facility into the rising wind. In the distance, she could see the lights of the command center where officers were still debating weather conditions and risk assessments. They were good people, competent soldiers, but they were trapped by the same bureaucracy that had grounded every other aircraft on the base. The difference was that Sarah Mitchell wasn't officially part of any unit at FOB Sentinel. According to the roster, she was an intelligence analyst on temporary assignment. But according to classified records that only a few people had clearance to access, she was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Ghost Mitchell, Navy SEAL, with operational authority that superseded local command structure in specific circumstances. Tonight, 280 trapped Marines constituted those specific circumstances. She moved through the compound toward Grid 47 Tango, past guard posts and equipment yards, past the routine operations of a forward base that had no idea what was about to happen. In her earpiece, she could hear fragments of radio traffic from the valley where Bravo Company was making their final preparations for an assault they probably wouldn't survive. As she reached the perimeter, Sarah paused for a moment to look back at FOB Sentinel. When she returned, if she returned, there would be questions, investigations, possible courts-martial for unauthorized operations, and violation of direct orders. But there would also be 280 Marines who came home alive. She keyed her tactical radio one final time. "Ghost Rider. Spectre 6 is at Extract Point Tango. Ready for pickup." "Roger, Spectre 6. We see you. Coming in now." Through the storm, she heard the distinctive whisper of rotor blades cutting through thin mountain air. The little bird appeared like a shadow against the cloudy sky, its pilot flying with the kind of precision that only came from years of special operations experience. As the aircraft settled into a hover just above the ground, Sarah could see two figures in the passenger compartment, operators from the same community she'd served with for 8 years. They wore the kind of gear that didn't appear in standard Army inventory, and their faces carried the calm intensity of people comfortable with impossible missions. One of them reached down to help her aboard. "Ma'am, it's an honor. We've heard stories about Ghost." Sarah grabbed his hand and swung into the aircraft. As the little bird lifted off into the storm, she looked down at FOB Sentinel shrinking below them. In the command center, officers were probably still studying weather reports and debating risk assessments, but Lieutenant Commander Sarah "Ghost" Mitchell was done waiting for permission to save lives. "Spectre 6 is airborne," she said into her radio. "Proceeding to Helmand Valley." The aircraft disappeared into the storm, carrying the first woman to serve as a SEAL team leader toward a mission that officially wasn't happening: to save 280 Marines who had no idea that help was finally coming. The little bird cut through the storm like a blade through silk, its pilot navigating by instruments and instinct through conditions that would have grounded conventional aircraft. Sarah sat in the passenger compartment, checking her gear one final time, while the two operators briefed her on the tactical situation. "Ma'am, I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," the senior operator said, his voice barely audible over the rotor noise. "This is Corporal Hayes. We've been monitoring Bravo Company's situation for the past hour." Rodriguez handed her a tactical tablet displaying real-time intelligence. The screen showed a three-dimensional map of Helmand Valley with enemy positions marked in red and friendly forces in blue. The Marines were compressed into a small defensive perimeter, surrounded on three sides by terrain that favored the attackers. "Latest count shows approximately 400 enemy fighters," Rodriguez continued. "They've got the high ground and prepared positions. Bravo Company is down to 25% ammunition and has 14 wounded who can't be moved." Sarah studied the display, her mind automatically calculating approach vectors and extraction routes. The valley was a natural kill zone: steep walls, limited cover, and only 2 viable landing zones. Both were currently under enemy fire. "What about close air support?" she asked. Hayes shook his head. "Negative, ma'am. Weather's got everything grounded except us. Bravo 6 has been requesting immediate extraction for the past 3 hours." Through her headset, Sarah could hear fragments of radio traffic from the valley. The voices were getting more clipped, more urgent. The sound of people who knew they were running out of time. "Bravo 6, this is Overlook 2. Enemy movement on your north flank. They're massing for assault." "Copy, Overlook. We see them. Stand by for contact." The radio crackled with static, then erupted in the sharp bark of automatic weapons fire. Sarah closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of the battle. M4S. Firing in controlled bursts, punctuated by the deeper sound of the squad's machine guns. In the background, she could hear orders being shouted, wounded men calling for medics, the organized chaos of Marines fighting for their lives. The pilot's voice cut through her earpiece. "Spectre 6, we're 5 minutes out from the valley. Weather's deteriorating rapidly. We've got maybe a 30-minute window before conditions become unflyable." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at Rodriguez. "What's the plan?" "Ma'am, we were hoping you'd tell us. Command said you have operational authority for this mission." It was the moment she'd been preparing for without realizing it. 3 years of desk assignments, of filing reports and analyzing data from a safe distance, had led to this helicopter flying through a storm toward 280 Marines who needed someone to make the kind of decision that couldn't be found in any regulation manual. She pulled up the tactical display again, studying the terrain with eyes that had memorized every ridge and valley during her previous deployment. There were options, but all of them required precision flying in conditions that most pilots would consider suicidal. "There," she said, pointing to a narrow valley that intersected Helmand from the east. "Canyon approach, stay below the ridgeline. We can use the storm as cover. Visibility works both ways." Rodriguez looked at the route she'd traced on the screen. "Ma'am, that's a tight corridor. Rotor clearance is maybe 20 feet on each side." I've flown it before, Sarah said simply. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, your file says intelligence analyst. When did you? 3 years ago, she interrupted. Different mission, same valley. The approach is difficult, but doable if you know the wind patterns. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. Spectre 6, I'm seeing the mouth of the canyon. Visibility is near zero, and we're getting crosswinds that are pushing us around pretty good. Sarah moved forward to look over the pilot's shoulder. Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Blade Thompson was one of the best special operations pilots in the Army, with a reputation for flying missions that existed only in classified after-action reports. If he was concerned about conditions, they were genuinely dangerous. Chief, what's your assessment? She asked. Blade glanced back at her, his night vision goggles pushed up on his helmet. Ma'am, it's flyable, but it's going to be close. These winds are gusting 40 knots, and the canyon's going to funnel them into something worse. Can you do it? He was quiet for a moment, considering. Yes, ma'am. But once we commit to the approach, we're committed. No way to turn around in that corridor. Sarah felt the familiar calm that had always settled over her before high-risk operations. It wasn't the absence of fear. It was fear transformed into focus. Uncertainty refined into purpose. Then, we're committed, she said. The little bird banked hard to the left, diving toward the canyon entrance. Through the storm, Sarah could see the walls closing in on both sides, dark stone streaked with snow and ice. The helicopter bucked and rolled in the turbulent air. Blade's hands steady on the controls as he fought to maintain course. Wind shear, he called out. Everybody hold on. The aircraft dropped suddenly, then climbed just as fast, the rotor blades slicing through air that seemed solid one moment and absent the next. Sarah gripped her safety harness, watching the canyon walls flash past only feet from the rotor tips. Rodriguez keyed his radio. Bravo 6, this is Ghost Rider. We're inbound for extraction. Pop smoke to mark your position. The response came back immediately, disbelief clear even through the static. Ghost Rider, say again? We were told no air assets available due to weather. Bravo 6, that was then. This is now. Pop smoke, we're coming in. On her tablet, Sarah watched as a green smoke marker appeared on the thermal display, a bright spot in the center of the Marines' defensive perimeter. The enemy positions were clearly visible as heat signatures along the ridgelines, muzzle flashes marking where they were concentrating fire. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. Contact front. The radio exploded with urgent voices. They're coming up the south slope. All units, enemy assault in progress. Through the storm and static, Sarah could hear the battle intensifying. The enemy had chosen their moment well, using the weather as cover for a coordinated assault on multiple fronts. The Marines were firing everything they had, but it wouldn't be enough. Blade's voice cut through the noise. Visual on the landing zone. It's hot down there, ma'am. Real hot. Sarah looked ahead through the canopy and felt her stomach clench. The valley floor was lit with muzzle flashes and tracer rounds, streams of fire crisscrossing the small area where Bravo Company had made their stand. The smoke grenade marked their position, but it also marked the center of a kill zone. Chief, can you get us down? Ma'am, I can get us down. Getting back up might be the problem. Rodriguez was already preparing to fast rope onto the ground. Ma'am, Hayes and I will secure the LZ while you coordinate extraction. Sarah shook her head. Negative. I'm going down with you. Ma'am, with respect. You're too valuable for ground operations. You should stay with the bird. She looked at Rodriguez with the expression she'd used to command SEAL teams through operations that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Sergeant, I've been in more firefights than you've had hot meals. I'm going down. And we're bringing every Marine back up. Clear? Rodriguez studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Crystal clear, ma'am. The little bird flared hard, blade fighting the controls as wind shear tried to slam them into the canyon wall. Below, Sarah could see Marines running between positions, some carrying wounded, others laying down suppressive fire to keep the enemy assault from overrunning their perimeter. 30 seconds, Blade called out. Sarah clipped into her fast rope harness, checking her weapon and equipment one final time. In 30 seconds, she would be on the ground in the middle of a firefight, responsible for coordinating the extraction of 280 Marines under conditions that military doctrine said were impossible. But Lieutenant Commander Sarah "Ghost" Mitchell had built her reputation on making the impossible look routine. The helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust and gunfire, and Sarah was already moving. The moment Sarah's boots hit the ground, she was in her element. The chaos of combat, incoming fire, shouted orders. The metallic tang of cordite in the air felt like coming home after 3 years in exile. She moved with the fluid precision of someone who had learned to think faster than bullets could fly. "Ghost Rider is on deck," Rodriguez called into his radio as he and Hayes spread out to provide security. Beginning extraction operations. The Marine defensive perimeter was smaller than the satellite images had suggested, maybe 50 meters across, surrounded by hastily constructed fighting positions carved into the rocky ground. Sarah counted muzzle flashes and estimated enemy strength while moving toward what appeared to be the command post, a shallow depression behind a cluster of boulders where several Marines clustered around radio equipment. She found Captain Michael Santos hunched over a radio, blood seeping through a bandage on his left shoulder. Santos was Bravo Company's commanding officer, a veteran of 3 deployments who'd earned his reputation leading Marines through some of the worst fighting in Afghanistan. "Captain Santos," Sarah called out, sliding into the fighting position beside him. "I'm here for your extraction." Santos looked up, his face streaked with dust and fatigue. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who's going to get you out of here." Santos studied her tactical gear, noting details that didn't match standard issue equipment. The customized vest, the gret, specialized communication gear. The confident way she moved despite the incoming fire snapping overhead. "You're not regular Army," he said. "No, I'm not." "What unit?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching tracer rounds streak across the perimeter, the kind that doesn't officially exist. Before Santos could respond, his radio operator grabbed his arm. "Sir, enemy on the East Ridge! They've got RPGs!" Sarah looked toward the ridgeline and saw the telltale flash of rocket-propelled grenades launching toward their position. She grabbed Santos and pulled him down as the first RPG detonated against the rocks 20 meters away, spraying shrapnel in all directions. "Return fire on that ridge," Santos shouted. "Suppress those RPG teams." The Marines responded with disciplined fire. But Sarah could see the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly. The enemy had them surrounded and was systematically destroying their fighting positions. Without immediate extraction, Bravo Company wouldn't last another hour. She keyed her radio. "Blade, what's your status up there?" "Taking fire from multiple positions, ma'am. I can hold for maybe 10 minutes before I have to relocate." 10 minutes to extract 280 Marines under heavy fire, in weather conditions that were getting worse by the minute. Sarah's mind ran through the possibilities, calculating load capacities and flight times with the automatic precision of someone who had planned similar operations dozens of times. Staff Sergeant Maria Vega, Santos's senior non-commissioned officer, crawled over to their position. "Sir, we've got 14 wounded who can't walk, plus ammunition's down to maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire." Santos looked at Sarah. "So what's your plan? Because if you're thinking we can all fit in that little helicopter, you're out of your mind." Sarah was already working the problem. "Blade, what's your maximum load for this altitude and weather?" "Maybe 12 personnel, ma'am." 13, if they're not carrying gear." She looked around the perimeter, counting heads, assessing the tactical situation. 280 Marines. Capacity for 12 per trip. Enemy closing in from all sides. The mathematics were impossible, unless she changed the variables. "Captain Santos, I need your best marksman," she said. "Why?" "Because we're going to thin out the welcoming committee." Santos pointed toward 2 Marines in a fighting position overlooking the valley approach. "Corporal Jackson and Lance Corporal Kim, best shots in the company." Sarah moved toward their position, staying low as bullets cracked overhead. Jackson was maybe 22 years old, with the steady eyes of someone who'd learned to kill at distances most people couldn't see. Kim was even younger, but her rifle was equipped with a scope that suggested serious expertise. "Marines," Sarah said, dropping into their position. "I need accurate fire on the ridge positions. Can you reach them?" Jackson squinted through his scope. "Ma'am, that's 800 meters in shifting wind. Difficult shot." "How difficult?" Kim chambered around and studied the target through her optic. "Give me a spotter and decent ammunition, I can make it work." Sarah smiled for the first time since landing. "Outstanding. I'll spot for you." She pulled out a rangefinder and laser designator, equipment that immediately caught Jackson's attention. "Ma'am, that's some serious gear. What kind of unit did you say you were from?" "The kind that makes impossible shots," Sarah replied, focusing the laser on an enemy fighting position. "Kim, I'm painting the target. Range is 795 meters, wind from the southeast at 15 knots. Kim adjusted her scope and settled into her shooting position. "Ready, ma'am." "Send it." The rifle cracked, and through her binoculars, Sarah saw an enemy fighter drop from the ridge position. "Hit. Next target." For the next 5 minutes, Sarah spotted while Kim and Jackson systematically eliminated enemy positions around the perimeter. Their shooting was precision work, each shot carefully calculated and executed with the kind of expertise that required years of training. But it was Sarah's spotting that impressed them. She read wind and distance like a textbook, adjusted for atmospheric conditions automatically, and painted targets with the confidence of someone who had done this work professionally. "Ma'am," Jackson said after a particularly difficult shot, "you're not just regular military. That spotting work is special operations level." Before Sarah could respond, Sergeant Vega crawled over to their position. "Santos wants to see you. Says we've got company coming up the south slope." Sarah moved back toward the command post, where Santos was studying the tactical situation with growing concern. "We bought ourselves some time, but they're massing for another assault. Bigger one this time." Through her binoculars, Sarah could see movement in the valley below. Enemy fighters moving into position, setting up for a coordinated attack that would overwhelm the Marine perimeter through sheer numbers. "How long until they're ready to move?" she asked. "Maybe 15 minutes, Sarah keyed her radio. "Blade, we need multiple trips. Can you handle hot extractions under fire?" "Ma'am, I can handle whatever you need, but we're going to need suppressive fire to keep those ridgelines clear." She looked around the perimeter, calculating positions and fields of fire. The Marines were good, disciplined, well-trained, experienced, but they were outnumbered and running low on ammunition. What they needed was someone who could coordinate their fire with the precision of a conductor directing an orchestra. Someone who had trained to turn small units into force multipliers. Someone who understood that sometimes 12 Marines with perfect positioning could accomplish what 100 Marines with poor positioning could not. Sarah grabbed Santos's radio handset. "All Bravo Company elements, this is Ghost. I'm assuming tactical control for extraction operations." The radio went silent for a moment. Then Santos leaned closer to her. "Ghost? As in call sign Ghost?" "That's affirmative." Santos stared at her for a long moment. "Holy shit, you're SEAL Team 6. Around them, Marines who'd overheard the conversation turned to look. The name carried weight in military circles. SEAL Team 6 was a unit that existed in whispers and legends, operators who handled missions that officially never happened. Corporal Jackson's voice came over the radio, filled with disbelief. "Ma'am, did he say SEAL Team 6? Sarah looked around at the faces watching her. Young Marines who'd grown up hearing stories about special operations, who understood that they were in the presence of someone who operated at a level they'd only imagined. "That's correct, Marine," she said into the radio. "Now let's get you home." For the first time since the siege began, hope flickered in the eyes around her. They were still surrounded, still outnumbered, still running low on ammunition, but they were no longer alone. The transformation in the Marines was immediate and electric. Word spread through the perimeter like wildfire. SEAL Team 6 was on the ground. Ghost herself was coordinating their extraction. Suddenly, impossible odds felt merely difficult. "Ma'am," Staff Sergeant Vega said, "permission to ask how exactly we're going to extract 280 Marines with one little bird?" Sarah was already sketching a tactical plan on Santos's map. "We're not extracting everyone at once. We're extracting them in order of priority, wounded first, then by fire teams in tactical sequence." "That's going to take dozens of trips," Santos pointed out. "The dozen for flest, the enemy won't give us that much time. They will if we convince them it's not in their interest to interfere." Sarah keyed her tactical radio to the frequency she'd been monitoring since leaving. "FOB Sentinel. Ghost Rider Base. This is Spectre 6. I need fire support on the following coordinates." The response came back within seconds. "Spectre 6. Ghost Rider Base. We have assets standing by. Send coordinates." As Sarah began calling in strikes on enemy positions, Jackson crawled over from his sniper position. "Ma'am, I've been in Afghanistan for 3 tours. I've never seen coordination like what you're doing." She looked up from the map. "What do you mean?" "The way you spotted for us. The way you read the terrain. The way you're calling in fire support." He paused, studying her face in the dim light. "Ma'am, you've done this before. Specifically this exact valley." Sarah continued marking targets on the map, but Jackson had caught something in her expression. "You have, haven't you? You've been here before." Before she could answer, the first artillery strike thundered down on the ridge positions. The explosion lit up the valley like daylight, silhouetting enemy fighters scrambling for cover. It was followed by 2 more strikes, perfectly placed to disrupt the massing assault without endangering the Marine perimeter. Santos stared at the destruction on the ridgelines. "How the hell did you get fire support authorization? We've been requesting artillery for 6 hours. Sarah's tactical radio buzzed. "Spectre 6. Additional assets inbound. Package includes AC-130 gunship with full load. ETA, 15 minutes. The Marines within earshot looked at each other in amazement. An AC-130 gunship was the kind of support that could change the entire tactical situation, but getting authorization for that level of firepower required command authority that went far beyond what a normal special operations team would have. Kim crawled over from her sniper position. "Ma'am, who exactly are you?" Because SEAL Team 6 doesn't usually operate alone, and they definitely don't have authority to call in AC-130 strikes without going through channels. Sarah was quiet for a moment, listening to the enemy radio chatter that her communication equipment was intercepting. They were confused, disorganized, trying to understand where the artillery strikes were coming from and why their assault had been disrupted so precisely. "Lance Corporal," she said finally, "what you need to know is that I'm going to get every one of you home alive." "Yes, ma'am, but—" "Incoming!" someone shouted. A mortar round detonated 30 meters from their position, showering them with dirt and rock fragments. Sarah immediately identified the source, a mortar team positioned on the north ridge, trying to bracket their position with indirect fire. She pulled out her laser designator and painted the enemy position. "Ghost Rider, this is Spectre 6. I have eyes on enemy mortar team. Requesting immediate strike on laser designation. Spectre 6, rounds inbound. Danger close. Take cover." The artillery strike hit the mortar position with surgical precision, eliminating the threat in a single devastating explosion. Sarah had called in the strike with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done it hundreds of times. Rodriguez appeared at their position, having completed a circuit of the perimeter. "Ma'am, the enemy's pulling back to reassess." We've got maybe 30 minutes before they try again. Enough time for the first extraction, Sarah said. Blade, what's your status? Ready for pickup, ma'am. Where do you want me? Sarah pointed to a flat area in the center of the perimeter. LZ Alpha. First load is 14 wounded, plus medical personnel to accompany them. As the little bird descended through the storm, Marines moved with newfound confidence. They were still surrounded, still outnumbered. But they were no longer fighting a hopeless battle. They were executing a plan directed by someone who understood how to turn tactical disadvantage into operational success. Corporal Hayes approached Sarah while the wounded were being loaded. Ma'am, the Marines are asking questions. What kind of questions? About your faith, previous deployment here. About how you know this terrain so well. About why you have communication equipment that can reach assets they've never heard of. Sarah watched the helicopter lift off with its first load of wounded Marines. In 15 minutes, 14 men would be receiving medical care instead of dying in a valley that most people couldn't find on a map. Hayes, she said. What do you think? Ma'am, I think you're Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell. Call sign Ghost. Former leader of SEAL Team 6 Alpha Squadron. I think you requested transfer to intelligence analysis after losing half your team in Syria 3 years ago. And I think tonight is the first time you've been operational since then. Sarah looked at him with surprise. How do you know all that? Because Rodriguez and I were part of the joint task force that extracted your team from Syria. We know who you are, ma'am. The question is why you're here, now, instead of at a desk at FOB Sentinel. The pieces clicked into place. These weren't random operators who'd been assigned to help her. They were men who'd served alongside her before, who understood exactly who they were working with. Santos overheard the conversation and moved closer. Syria? You're the SEAL team leader who held off 3 companies of enemy fighters for 18 hours until extraction? That was my team, Sarah said quietly. The same team that rescued 200 civilians from that compound? Half my team died in that operation. Santos was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Then he keyed his radio. All Bravo Company elements, listen up. We've got Lieutenant Commander Ghost Mitchell coordinating our extraction. Some of you may know that call sign. For those who don't, she's the SEAL who saved 200 lives in Syria. Tonight, she's here to save ours. The radio crackled with responses from around the perimeter. Marines who'd heard the stories, who understood they were in the presence of a legend. Ghost 6, this is Overlook 2. It's an honor, ma'am. Ghost 6, Jackson here. We're ready for whatever you need. All units, this is Ghost 6, Sarah responded. We're bringing everyone home. No one gets left behind. As the little bird disappeared into the storm with its first load of wounded, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, the absolute confidence that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The enemy might have superior numbers and position, they might control the high ground, and have the advantage of prepared defenses. But they were facing Lieutenant Commander Sarah Ghost Mitchell, and she had never lost a Marine under her command. Tonight wasn't going to be the first time. The second extraction lifted off as the AC-130 gunship arrived overhead, its sensors painting the battlefield in infrared precision. Sarah coordinated the aircraft's devastating firepower with the calm efficiency of someone conducting a symphony orchestra, each strike carefully calculated to degrade enemy capabilities without endangering the Marines below. Spectre 21. This is Ghost 6. She called into her radio. I have multiple targets along the North Ridgeline. Requesting fires on my designation. Ghost 6. Spectre 21. We have you loud and clear. Standing by for targeting. The AC-130's 105mm cannon spoke with the voice of thunder, each round finding its mark with surgical precision. Enemy positions that had taken hours to construct disappeared in seconds, their occupants scattered or eliminated. Sarah directed the gunship's fire with an expertise that left the Marines watching in awe. How is she doing that? Kim whispered to Jackson as another perfectly placed strike eliminated an enemy mortar team. Experience, Jackson replied, watching Sarah coordinate multiple radio frequencies while simultaneously planning the next extraction sequence. That's what 20 years of special operations looks like. The third helicopter load lifted off with 16 Marines, including some of the walking wounded who could still fight if needed. The enemy had pulled back to regroup, giving them a brief respite from the intense small arms fire that had characterized the earlier extractions. Santos approached Sarah's position carrying a piece of paper. "Ma'am, we just received a communication from FOB Sentinel." Sarah looked up from her tactical planning. "What kind of communication?" "Orders for you to cease operations and return to base immediately." "It's signed by Colonel Crawford." She read the message quickly, then folded it and put it in her pocket. "Copy that." "Ma'am, what are your intentions?" Sarah looked around the perimeter at the remaining Marines. They were tired, low on ammunition, and surrounded by an enemy that outnumbered them 4-1. But their morale was high, their discipline intact, and their confidence in the extraction plan absolute. "Captain Santos," she said, "I'm going to finish what I started." Santos studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." As the fourth helicopter approached for landing, Rodriguez crawled over to Sarah's position. "Ma'am, we're getting radio traffic from FOB Sentinel. They're demanding answers about unauthorized helicopter operations." "Let them demand," Sarah replied. "We've got Marines to extract." The little bird flared for landing, and Sarah began directing the next group of Marines toward the aircraft. As they moved across the perimeter, she noticed something that made her pause. Every Marine she passed stopped what they were doing and snapped to attention. Not the casual acknowledgement of rank that characterized normal military courtesy, but the sharp, precise attention that soldiers reserved for officers they genuinely respected. Corporal Williams, a machine gunner who'd been providing suppressive fire for the past 6 hours, stood as she passed his position. "Ma'am," he said, raising his hand in a crisp salute. Sarah returned the salute, automatically, but as she continued across the perimeter, more Marines began acknowledging her presence in the same way. First one, then several, then entire fire teams stopping their activities to salute as she passed. Staff Sergeant Vega was coordinating the loading sequence when she noticed what was happening. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "the Marines are talking." "About what?" "About who you are. About what you've done. Word is spreading that you're the SEAL team leader from Syria. The one who saved all those civilians." Sarah continued directing Marines toward the helicopter, but she could feel the change in atmosphere around her. These weren't just soldiers following orders anymore, they were men and women who understood they were in the presence of someone legendary. The helicopter lifted off with its fourth load, leaving approximately 180 Marines still in the perimeter. The enemy had begun probing attacks again, testing their defenses with small unit tactics designed to identify weak points for a larger assault. "Ghost 6. This is Overlook 3, came a voice over the radio. "We've got movement on the east slope. Looks like they're positioning for another major push." Sarah studied the thermal display on her tablet, watching enemy heat signatures moving through the darkness. They were being methodical now, having learned to respect the defensive firepower that the Marines could bring to bear. "All units, this is Ghost 6, she transmitted. "Enemy assault inbound from the east. Prepare defensive fires on my command." As she coordinated the defensive response, Sarah noticed that the radio traffic had changed. The Marines weren't just acknowledging her orders, they were responding with the kind of immediate, unquestioning compliance that she'd experienced only during her time leading SEAL teams. "Ghost 6, Jackson here. I have eyes on the assault force. Request permission to engage." "Permission granted." "Take them down." "Copy that, ma'am." "With pleasure." The enemy assault began with a coordinated barrage of rocket-propelled grenades, followed by small unit rushes designed to overwhelm specific points in the perimeter. Sarah directed the defensive fires with tactical precision, using the AC-130 overhead to break up massing formations, while the Marine riflemen engaged individual targets. Spectre 21, this is Ghost 6. I need fires on grid 7-42851. Danger close. Ghost 6. That's danger close to your position. Confirm you want fires on that grid. Confirmed. Marines are in hard cover. Light them up. The 25mm cannon from the AC-130 stitched across the attacking formation, breaking their assault and forcing them back to covered positions. The coordinated defense had turned what should have been a successful enemy attack into a costly failure. As the firing died down, Santos made his way to Sarah's position. "Ma'am, that was textbook defensive coordination. I've never seen anything like it." "It's what we trained for," Sarah replied, checking the ammunition status of the various fire teams. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Syria, your team. What really happened out there?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the thermal signatures of enemy fighters withdrawing to regroup. "We were assigned to rescue 2 American contractors being held in a compound outside Damascus. Intelligence said light security, quick in and out. But it wasn't. Intelligence was wrong. The compound was a training facility with over 300 fighters. My team got inside, but we couldn't get out. We ended up holding the compound for 18 hours while extraction was arranged." Santos waited for her to continue. "There were civilians in the compound. 200 Syrian refugees being held as forced labor. When we realized we couldn't extract everyone, my team made a decision." "What decision?" "We stayed, held the compound until helicopters could come for the civilians. Half my team died covering the extraction." Santos stared at her. "You gave up your own extraction to save people you'd never met." "We gave up our easy extraction. We all made it out eventually. But at a cost." Sarah nodded. "At a cost." Around them, Marines were preparing for the next helicopter arrival, but their movements had taken on a different quality, more focused, more determined. They were no longer just following evacuation procedures. They were following a leader they trusted completely. Corporal Hayes approached their position. "Ma'am, 5th Bird is inbound, but we've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "FOB Sentinel is demanding we abort operations. They're threatening to scramble interceptors to force the helicopters back to base." Sarah looked at Hayes for a moment, then keyed her tactical radio. "Ghost Rider Base, this is Spectre 6. Confirm you're receiving interference from local command." "Spectre 6. That's affirmative. We're being ordered to terminate operations and return assets to base." "Copy that, Ghost Rider. What are your intentions?" There was a pause. Then, "Spectre 6, our orders come from higher authority than FOB Sentinel. We continue until you say stop." Around the perimeter, Marines who'd overheard the radio traffic looked at each other with growing understanding. They were witnessing something unprecedented, a special operations mission that was being conducted without official authorization, led by an officer who had the authority to override local command decisions. The 5th helicopter landed and took off with another 16 Marines. As it disappeared into the storm, Sergeant Vega approached Sarah with a question that everyone was thinking but no one had dared to ask. "Ma'am," she said, "exactly what level of authority do you have?" Sarah looked around at the remaining Marines, tired, dirty, but still disciplined and ready. "Enough," she said simply. But as the word spread through the perimeter that their extraction was being conducted against direct orders from their own command, something changed in the way the Marines looked at her. It wasn't just respect anymore. It was reverence. They weren't just being rescued by a SEAL team leader. They were being rescued by someone who had the authority and the courage to tell the entire military command structure to go to hell when lives were on the line. And as the 6th helicopter approached through the storm, every Marine in that perimeter understood that they were in the presence of something they'd never encountered before, an officer who cared more about bringing them home alive than about following rules. At FOB Sentinel, the command center had erupted into controlled chaos. Officers clustered around communication equipment, their faces illuminated by the glow of tactical displays showing helicopter movements that weren't supposed to exist. Colonel Crawford stood at the main console, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "Get me a direct line to those aircraft. I want them back on the ground immediately." Captain Webb worked frantically at the communication station, trying to establish contact with helicopters that were operating on frequencies he couldn't access. "Sir, I'm getting no response. They're not monitoring any of our standard channels." "Then use emergency frequencies. Use whatever it takes." Major Reyes looked up from a tactical display. "Sir, we've got confirmation from AWACS that there are multiple aircraft operating in the Helmand Valley, fixed-wing and rotary-wing assets that aren't on our flight manifest." Crawford's jaw tightened. "Whose assets?" "Unknown, sir. But whoever authorized this operation has command authority that supersedes ours." The implications of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. There were very few organizations in the military that could override a forward operating base commander's authority in his own area of operations. Captain Torres burst through the door, carrying a tablet with urgent information. "Sir, I've been monitoring communication intercepts. We're getting fragments of radio traffic from someone with the call sign Ghost 6. Webb turned from his communication console. "Ghost 6? That's not on our roster." "No, sir. But I ran the call sign through classified databases." Torres paused, checking her screen again. "Sir, Ghost 6 is the operational call sign for Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell." Crawford stared at her. "Mitchell? Our intelligence analyst?" "Sir, Sarah Mitchell isn't just an intelligence analyst. According to her classified file, she's a former SEAL Team 6 Squadron commander. Her operational record is mostly redacted, but what I can see indicates extensive special operations experience." Webb's face went pale. "SEAL Team 6? She's SEAL Team 6? Former SEAL Team 6. Torres corrected. "But according to this file, she maintains operational authority for special circumstances involving Joint Task Force operations." Crawford sank into his chair, the blind down, full magnitude of the situation becoming clear. "She's not just extracting those Marines. She's conducting an authorized special operations mission without telling us." "Sir," Reyes said, "we've been trying to stop a legitimate operation." The radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "FOB Sentinel, this is Ghost Rider Command. You are ordered to cease all interference with ongoing special operations." This comes directly from JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, the highest level of special operations authority in the military. Crawford felt the ground shifting beneath him as he realized he'd been trying to override orders that came from levels of command he'd never even interacted with. Webb stared at the radio in disbelief. "Sir, what are we supposed to do?" Before Crawford could answer, the communication console lit up with an incoming call from their higher headquarters. The caller ID showed a number that made Crawford's stomach drop. It was the general commanding the entire theater of operations. "Colonel Crawford," came the voice, crisp with authority. "I understand you've been interfering with a classified operation." "Sir, I had no knowledge of any authorized operations in my area." "That's because it's above your clearance level, Colonel. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell is operating under direct authority from JSOC. You will provide any support she requests and ask no questions about her mission parameters." Crawford felt heat rising in his face. "Sir, with respect, one of my officers took unauthorized action that put lives at risk." "Colonel, that officer has saved 280 Marines who would otherwise be dead, and she did it by using authority that you don't have the clearance to understand. Stand down immediately." The line went dead. Crawford stared at the phone for a long moment, then slowly hung up. Around him, the staff watched in silence, processing the implications of what they'd just heard. Captain Webb stood frozen at his console, his face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and something approaching shame. "Sir, I called her a desk jockey. I said whether flying required specialized training." Torres looked at her tablet again. According to her file, she has over 3,000 hours of special operations flight time. She's qualified on more aircraft than most pilots will ever see. Including weather flying? Webb asked, weakly. Including everything, sir. Her qualifications list takes up 3 pages. Major Reyes studied the tactical display, showing the ongoing extraction operation. Sir, look at this coordination. The way she's managing multiple aircraft, directing fire support, sequencing extractions under combat conditions. This isn't someone making it up as she goes along. Crawford watched the display, seeing the tactical situation with new understanding. The helicopter movements weren't random or desperate, they were part of a carefully orchestrated plan executed with professional precision. The fire support wasn't haphazard, it was surgical strikes coordinated by someone who understood exactly how to use each weapon system for maximum effect. Webb slumped in his chair. Sir, I need to make a confession. Go ahead, Captain. When she suggested flying under the weather, I dismissed her because I thought she was just an intelligence analyst who didn't understand aviation. But looking at what she's accomplishing out there. He paused, staring at the tactical display. She was right. About everything. Torres pulled up weather data on her screen. Sir, she filed a meteorological assessment earlier today. Everything she predicted about temperature inversions and flyable conditions under the storm has been accurate to the minute. Crawford studied the weather report with growing amazement. It wasn't just accurate, it was the work of someone who understood atmospheric conditions at a level that required years of specialized training and experience. My God, he whispered. She knew exactly what she was doing from the beginning. The radio crackled again with an update from the valley. FOB Sentinel. This is Ghost 6. Extraction proceeding on schedule. Estimate completion in 4 hours. Webb grabbed his microphone with trembling hands. Ghost 6, this is FOB Sentinel. Do you require any support? There was a pause. Then, negative, Sentinel. We have everything we need. Webb's voice cracked slightly as he continued. Ghost 6, ma'am. Request permission to provide any assistance possible. Weather updates, communication relays, whatever you need. Another pause. Copy that, Sentinel. Appreciated. As the transmission ended, Webb put his head in his hands. Sir, I tried to ground the best pilot I've ever seen because I thought she didn't know what she was talking about. Crawford walked over to Webb's station and put a hand on the captain's shoulder. Son, we all made assumptions. The difference is we're going to learn from them. On the tactical display, they watched as the 8th helicopter lifted off from the valley, carrying another load of Marines to safety. The operation was proceeding with clockwork precision, each phase executed flawlessly by someone who clearly knew exactly what she was doing. Torres looked up from her intelligence reports. Sir, there's something else. Her brother was killed in that same valley 3 years ago. Staff Sergeant Adam Monroe, Delta Force. He died during a convoy rescue mission. The room fell silent. Crawford stared at the tactical display, understanding flooding through him. She's not just rescuing those Marines. She's finishing something her brother started. Webb raised his head, his eyes wet. Sir, permission to volunteer for any support role she needs. Granted. Sir, Torres added, I'd like to volunteer as well. Same here, sir, Reyes said. Crawford looked around at his staff officers who had spent the evening trying to stop an operation they didn't understand, now desperate to help in any way could. All right, he said. Let's figure out how to support the best officer any of us have ever seen in action. As if summoned by his words, the radio crackled again with Sarah's voice, calm and professional despite the chaos around her. Sentinel, this is Ghost 6. I need you to clear a flight path for medical evacuation birds. We're going to have wounded who need immediate attention. Webb grabbed his microphone instantly. Ghost 6, Sentinel. Consider it done. We'll clear the entire airspace for your operations. Copy that, Sentinel. Thank you. Crawford stood watching the tactical display, feeling something he hadn't experienced in 20 years of military service. He was witnessing genuine leadership, Not the kind that came from rank or position, but the kind that earned absolute trust through competence, courage, and an unwavering commitment to bringing people home alive. In the valley, Lieutenant Commander Sarah "Ghost" Mitchell continued coordinating the impossible, turning a desperate situation into a textbook extraction operation through sheer professional excellence. And at FOB Sentinel, every officer in the command center understood that they had just learned what real military leadership looked like. Dawn was breaking over Helmand Valley as the final helicopter lifted off, carrying the last 18 Marines to safety. Sarah stood in the empty perimeter, surrounded by the debris of a 12-hour battle that had ended with every single Marine coming home alive. Rodriguez and Hayes moved through the abandoned fighting positions, conducting a final sweep to ensure no equipment or intelligence had been left behind. The enemy had withdrawn during the night, their assault having failed completely against the coordinated defense Sarah had orchestrated. "Ma'am," Rodriguez called out, "perimeter is clear. We're ready for extraction." Sarah looked around the valley one final time. 3 years ago, her brother had died somewhere in these mountains, along with half his Delta Force team, trying to rescue trapped personnel. Tonight, she had finished what he started. She touched the patch sewn inside her sleeve, his unit insignia, the only thing she had left of Staff Sergeant Adam Monroe. "We got them all, Adam," she whispered. "Every single one." The little bird descended through the clearing dawn sky. Blades expert flying evident in the way he handled the aircraft, even after 12 hours of continuous operations. As Sarah climbed aboard for the final time, she felt the exhaustion hitting her like a physical weight. "Outstanding work, ma'am," Hayes said as the helicopter lifted off. 280 Marines extracted, 0 KIA, minimal casualties. That's going to go down in Special Operations history. Sarah didn't respond. She was watching the valley recede below them, thinking about the young Marines who would go home to their families, who would have the chance to grow old and tell stories about the night they were surrounded in Afghanistan. "Go 6. This is FOB Sentinel," came Webb's voice over the radio. "We have the runway cleared for your arrival. Medical personnel standing by." "Copy that. Sentinel." "Ma'am," Webb continued, his voice carrying a tone of profound respect. "It's been an honor to support your operation." As they approached FOB Sentinel, Sarah could see activity on the runway that wasn't normal for dawn operations. Vehicles lined the tarmac, their headlights creating pools of light in the pre-dawn darkness. Personnel stood in formations that suggested this wasn't just a routine aircraft landing. "Ma'am," Blade said over the intercom, "looks like you've got a welcoming committee." The little bird touched down softly, its engines winding down after the longest night of flying any of them had experienced. As Sarah climbed out of the aircraft, she was surprised by what she saw. The entire command staff of FOB Sentinel stood in formation beside the runway. Colonel Crawford, Major Reyes, Captain Torres, Captain Webb, every officer who had been in the command center during the night's operations. Behind them stood representatives from various units on the base, soldiers who had monitored the radio traffic and understood what had been accomplished. But what struck Sarah most was their bearing. They weren't standing casually or in the loose formation typical of officers gathering for a routine arrival. They were standing at attention with the precision reserved for formal ceremonies. Colonel Crawford stepped forward as Sarah approached. His face showed the strain of a night spent realizing how badly he had misjudged the situation, but his expression carried genuine respect and something approaching awe. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell," he said formally. Sarah came to attention and saluted. "Sir." Crawford returned the salute, but instead of dropping his hand immediately, he held it in place. "Ma'am, on behalf of 280 Marines who came home alive tonight, thank you." He lowered his salute, then did something that sent a ripple of astonishment through the watching personnel. He came to attention again and raised his hand in a second, slower, more deliberate salute. "Ma'am, on behalf of every officer at this base who learned what real leadership looks like tonight, it is an honor to serve with you." Behind him, every member of the command staff came to attention and rendered the same formal salute. not the casual acknowledgement of rank that characterized routine military interaction, but the kind of salute reserved for genuine heroes. Captain Webb stepped forward, his face showing the emotional weight of the night's revelations. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on incomplete information. I was wrong." Sarah looked at Webb, remembering his dismissive comments about weather flying and specialized training. "Captain, you were working with the information you had." "Ma'am, that's no excuse. I should have listened instead of, quote, lecturing. I should have asked questions instead of making assumptions." Webb's voice carried the weight of a professional pilot who understood how close he had come to preventing a successful rescue operation. "The important thing is that we accomplished the mission," Sarah replied. Major Reyes approached with a tablet displaying the operation summary. "Ma'am, the numbers are extraordinary. 12 aircraft sorties, 280 personnel extracted, 0 fatalities, minimal casualties, all under combat conditions, in weather that grounded conventional aircraft." Captain Torres added her assessment. "Ma'am, the coordination between air and ground assets was textbook special operations. The way you managed multiple radio frequencies, directed fire support, and sequenced extractions while maintaining tactical awareness of the overall situation. I've never seen anything like it." Sarah felt the weight of their attention, the genuine respect in their voices. These were competent officers who had dedicated their careers to military service, and they were looking at her with the kind of professional admiration that couldn't be faked or forced. The success of the operation was due to the professionalism and courage of every Marine in that valley, she said. They followed orders, maintained discipline, and trusted the process. That's what made extraction possible. Colonel Crawford shook his head. "Ma'am, those Marines were surrounded and outnumbered. Without your intervention, they would have been overrun within hours. You didn't just coordinate an extraction, you turned an impossible situation into a routine operation through superior tactical leadership." Behind the command staff, Sarah noticed other personnel had gathered. Enlisted soldiers, NCOs, junior officers. Word had spread through the base about the night's operations, and people had come to see the SEAL team leader who had defied orders to save 280 Marines. Staff Sergeant Cole, the crew chief who had fueled her aircraft the night before, stepped forward. "Ma'am, when you asked me to fuel and arm that bird, I thought you were making a mistake. I was wrong. It was an honor to support your mission." Similar comments came from other personnel who had played small roles in the operation. The communications specialist who had monitored frequencies, the intelligence analyst who had provided enemy assessments, the logistics coordinator who had arranged medical evacuation assets. All of them understood that they had been part of something extraordinary, an operation that would be studied in military schools and remembered in unit histories. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the runway, Crawford addressed the assembled personnel. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we witnessed tonight was a demonstration of military excellence at the highest level. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's actions exemplify the values we all swore to uphold: duty, honor, country, and an unwavering commitment to bringing our people home." He turned back to Sarah. "Ma'am, I would be honored if you would consider a permanent assignment to this command. We need officers with your capabilities and experience." Sarah was quiet for a moment, looking around at the faces watching her. 3 years ago, she had requested a transfer away from operational assignments, seeking the safety and anonymity of intelligence analysis. Tonight had reminded her why she had chosen military service in the first place. "Sir," she said, "I appreciate the offer, but my current assignment serves an important purpose." Crawford raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, someone needs to make sure that intelligence analysts understand what operations actually look like. Someone needs to bridge the gap between planning and execution, between theory and reality." She looked around at the assembled personnel. "What we accomplished tonight wasn't possible because I ignored regulations or broke rules. It was possible because I understood which rules were designed to ensure safety and which were designed to limit risk. Sometimes saving lives requires accepting risk that looks impossible on paper. Webb nodded slowly. Ma'am, that's a lesson I won't forget. Neither will any of us, Torres added. As the formal ceremony concluded and personnel began returning to their duties, Sarah felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced since Syria. She had proven to herself that 3 years behind a desk hadn't diminished her operational capabilities. More importantly, she had brought every single Marine home alive. Rodriguez and Hayes approached as she prepared to return her gear to storage. Ma'am, Rodriguez said, it's been an honor working with you again. Likewise, Sergeant. Take care of yourselves. Ma'am, Hayes added, if you ever decide to return to operational status, you know where to find us. Sarah smiled. I'll keep that in mind. As she walked toward the equipment storage facility, Sarah reflected on the night's events. She had started the evening as an intelligence analyst filing weather reports. She was ending it as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Ghost Mitchell, SEAL Team 6, having conducted one of the most successful extraction operations in recent military history. Behind her, the base was returning to its normal routine. But the conversations in the mess halls, the stories that would be told and retold, the lessons that would be learned and passed on to future generations of soldiers, those would endure. She had reminded an entire forward operating base what military leadership looked like when it prioritized mission accomplishment and the welfare of personnel above personal career considerations. And somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, in a valley where her brother had died 3 years earlier, the silence was finally complete. Sarah touched the patch sewn inside her sleeve one final time, then walked into the Afghan sunrise, ready to return to the quiet work of intelligence analysis with the knowledge that when it mattered most, she could still make the impossible look routine. The story of the night 280 Marines came home alive would be told in training schools and unit histories for decades to come. But Lieutenant Commander Sarah Ghost Mitchell had already moved on to her next assignment, ensuring that future operations would benefit from the lessons learned in a valley where courage trumped regulations and leadership trumped rank. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where are you watching from, and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.